The Georgia Bulldogs had their spring game yesterday. The first headline I see, I'm settling in here at the office. I got like 19 TVs on. I'm all ready to go. And then I see a headline from our Rusty Manziel. 6 scholarship receivers are going to miss the G-Day game. Well, that's wonderful. And so there weren't exactly the opportunities we hoped, including with Arian Smith, the guy that we circled on the show Thursday. We didn't get the opportunities we hoped. We thought it may be rain that held the passing game in check. As it turns out, it was, well, a combination of other things. They had pretty good weather there yesterday. Kearis Jackson looked good. Kearis Jackson's a name that you know as the wide receiver room there in Athens kind of filters in and out. Kearis Jackson's a proven commodity for them. But how about Adonai Mitchell? Adonai Mitchell is a perfect example, just like we talked about with LSU. You got some guys missing time. You got some guys who are going to be out for the spring game. And so Adonai Mitchell says, I'll step up. And he stepped up yesterday. He caught a laser from JT Daniels, but he's also a guy in the aftermath, or as you might know it, a press conference, that Kirby Smart talked about as having come on in the last week. He was not a guy who was very highly touted in recruiting, but he was a guy that in the evaluation process, he made a point to say, as you're looking at the catch right there, Kirby Smart made a point to say, we didn't really care how many stars he had next to his name. We trust our evaluation, and our evaluation on him was that he was a take for us, and so they took him. And he's been really good for him, obviously an early enrollee. Kirby made it a point to say the last 3 practices he had up to this spring game were his best. Got some conditioning work to do. He did not talk about him at all like he's a finished product, and that's always what I want to hear. When these guys pop in the spring game, I want to hear the coaches talk about him afterwards, because sometimes you'll have a guy that it just all aligned for in the spring game, but you did not get an accurate portrayal in that spring game of the kind of player they are. And if that's the case, coaches will not hype them up. They will not allow them to be hyped up in a post game. They'll start talking about the things they still need to work on. Well, Kirby didn't do a whole lot of that yesterday. He was effusive in his praise. Talked about conditioning, talked about some things that he needed to clean up, but that's going to be a guy that they think they can count on. Now, the question is, once they get all those half dozen scholarship receivers they were missing yesterday back for fall, well, then all of a sudden you wonder, where does a guy like Mitchell fit into that rotation? Wherever it is, I think he'll have a place. They want to go. I mean, they want to have 6 or 7 guys that they can rotate in there. JT Daniels looks ready. JT Daniels leads me to believe that for the first time in quite a while, and I want you to think about what I'm saying here, and I want to restart it because I want to use this as a clip. JT Daniels makes me think that we're in a position at Georgia right now, for the first time in a while, you don't have to enter the season with quarterback as a question mark. Maybe defensive back? How ironic would that be? Perhaps offensive line? When's the last time we entered a season? And you're a Georgia fan, and you're looking there in July and August, and you're saying, what are the biggest questions here? Well, we got quarterback figured out. We got a stud there. Now, I don't know about these defensive backs. Now, this offensive line may hold us back. Normally, it's the inverse. So it's funny how things change. Like the ranking next to your team may look roughly the same, but the style of team changes every year. It's really fun. He's got everything. JT Daniels possesses everything from a skill set standpoint that they're going to need to be a contender this year. He's smart. He's intuitive. I think they touched on that in great detail on broadcast yesterday. Showed a lot of touch. I mean, he's got a plus arm when he needs it. He's got the touch when he needs it. Poise, when you talk to quarterbacks coaches, is the most important intangible that you can have. He's got that, really good pocket awareness. He's mobile enough, got enough pocket mobility. You saw him stretch plays a couple of times yesterday and end up making plays and pushing the ball downfield because of that. He's got everything they need. If he stays healthy, it's not going to be quarterback that holds Georgia back this year. Interesting change. So then we talk about, well, what could hold him back? Not necessarily that yesterday was a definitive answer on this question, but I didn't leave yesterday having all of my concerns eased about their offensive line. Early on, what stood out to me the most was offensive line sprung some leaks. It wasn't just from one position. It wasn't really just from one area. Edge pressure was effective. Interior pressure was effective. Now, that cleaned up a little bit as the afternoon went on. There are different reasons. When you talk to people around the program, there are different reasons that can be explained away. Kind of like we talked about with LSU, to be honest with you. Yesterday, and most times under Kirby Smart during spring, Georgia has leaned heavy on the pass. Our defensive guys know that. They can pin their ears back. It's a little bit different than the dynamic that they'd have in a normal game. And so I don't know. My point is, I don't know how to interpret all that. I'll just say I don't know that we're entering the 2021 season looking at that offensive line as this impenetrable force that sometimes Preview Magazine has us believing Georgia's offensive line is. they still have a very high ceiling, having said that. Jamari Salyer is a guy who probably holds a lot of that in his hands. Georgia's going to be a problem for a lot of RPO-based offenses out there, and I'll tell you exactly why. Anytime that we're looking at a prolific passing attack out there, a prolific RPO-based passing attack, what's normally happening is they're normally not getting disrupted up the middle. There just aren't a lot of bodies like Wyatt for Georgia, like Jordan Davis for Georgia. There just aren't a lot of those guys out there. But because Georgia recruits so well, they can have so many sub packages, they can be so multiple defensively that they can have terrors off the edge like Adam Anderson, but they can also have guys that can really collapse you on the interior. And when you put all that stuff together, my point is disruption to an RPO-based offense, to a timing and rhythm offense, is no different than throwing the stick in the bicycle spokes. And they have the ability to do that. And so I'm not saying that, well, they have the secret formula and ingredients for being the magic elixir that beats an Alabama or an Ohio State if they run up against them. I'm just saying that's the kind of defensive personnel that you would need to have in order to pull something like that off. If you turned on a game and let's say they were playing in Alabama and all of a sudden Bama's averaging 50 points a game and you go into the fourth quarter and they got 23 on the board or something like that. Well, that would be how that happens if it were to happen. But it's time for Kirby and his staff to go to work here because they've got the question, that long-awaited answer to that quarterback question. Well, they have it now. And so, sure, this is an imperfect roster. I got good news for them. Even as loaded as some of these other teams are, there is no perfect team out there. So they got plenty enough kids that can play high enough ball on this team to contend for a national championship. And they got the piece of quarterback that they haven't had. And so now, if your biggest question is defensive back, and your head coach is Kirby Smart, and you got Dan Lanning over there, and you just brought Will Muschamp in off the scrap heap for good measure, you better get defensive back figured out. There's no reason not to. Youth and inexperience, when you got as much talent as they have on the roster there, they are not viable excuses. They just won't be. And so you also play in a conference where you can afford a hiccup and still achieve everything that you want to achieve. But I think defensive back, we probably exit spring at Georgia with defensive back to me as being the biggest question there. But I'm really interested to see how they handle this summer and then leading up to fall and that opener against Clemson because that staff, this is why you go out and you get as many quality coaches as you can and you stack them. Partly so no one else can have them. But the other side is this is going to be a situation you face in some shape, form, or fashion every year. When you roll over the percentage of your roster you do at the college level, you're going to have green aspects of your roster no matter where it is. This year it happens to be defensive back. That happens to be your coaching wheelhouse. Got to get it done this year.